Good afternoon. Welcome to the Memorial Art Gallery. I'm Jonathan Binstock. I'm the Mary W. and Donald R. Clark Director. I'm delighted to be here with you and delighted to welcome you. On the screen is an abbreviated version of the Memorial Art Gallery's land acknowledgement. There is a full version of the land acknowledgement displayed on a monitor in the pavilion, in the Van den Broek Pavilion. And we have it there for you to read. It's always dynamically presented and ready to be changed at any moment because of the way it is on display on a monitor in the pavilion. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for the Ubuhle Women exhibition. And at the top of that list, we must acknowledge the Rubens Family Foundation, Noken and Associates, who are our supporting sponsors for this exhibition, and the Rochester chapter of the Links Incorporated, also an important sponsor. Many other important sponsors as well to this program there are, and we are grateful to all of them. We could not bring an exhibition like Ubuhle Women to Rochester. We couldn't do the work that we do without the generous support of so many people, including you folks here who are members, who are coming and visiting and paying admission and supporting the Memorial Art Gallery. So thank you for your support. Thanks to the supporters of the exhibition for their support. And we are grateful to do this work, elevating the profile of the arts here in Rochester and in Western New York and beyond, for that matter. Today's today's program is, of course, inspired by the Ubuhle Women exhibition, which, if you haven't seen, I'm sure you will. If you have seen, you will know how wonderful this exhibition is, how beautiful, how inspiring, how moving, because it's a very rich, if you will, a portrait or story of human perseverance and hard work and ingenuity and resourcefulness, right? The work that you see in our galleries and that is available for purchase in the gallery store supports a community of people in terms of their the care of their families, education, healthcare, all of the essentials to life that we all, of course, value and know how important they are. I'm very grateful that Bev Gibson is here today. Bev Gibson is the co-founder of Ubuhle Women and the co-curator of the present exhibition. If we could just give her a round of applause as our special guest. You want to say hello? Just wave. Bev, that's a warm Rochester welcome. That's what happens when you visit Rochester. You get a nice, beautiful welcome like that. The program today is a really interesting one. I hope you find it fascinating. We have with us our McPherson Director of Academic Programs, Dr. Nile Blunt, and Jessica Marten, our Curator-in-Charge and Curator of American Art. They are going to have a conversation about the process of bringing exhibitions to the Memorial Art Gallery. For example, of course, Ubuhle Women. I'm sure that will be an important part of their discussion. But this is a really terrific opportunity to learn more about how the staff go about coming up with ideas, debating ideas, discussing and debating them, and then deciding on what we're going to show here at the Memorial Art Gallery, how we're going to do it, and of course, in the process of having this conversation, a lot of whys will be answered and why we make the decisions that we make. I don't think there's much more for me to say. I think we should get on with the program. So without further ado, my colleagues and friends, Dr. Nile Blunt and Jessica Marten.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and thank you for supporting MAG and this wonderful exhibition. I want to give a little bit of context into how it came to be that Nile and I are on the stage together as the head of our academic programs department and as the head of our curatorial department. We do a lot of work hand in hand where we are really thinking about the content of exhibitions and the sort of content of our collections and how that can connect with our audiences. And so we really are two hands of the same body in many ways, in that we work so closely together to think through interpretation. So when the opportunity came up for us to use Ubuhle Women as an opportunity to talk about where MAG is going and what our goals are in terms of becoming an engaged global museum, this seemed like a nice opportunity for us to have a really, I think, pretty casual conversation with an opportunity for questions afterwards that'll give you a bit of a behind-the-scenes glimpse into where MAG has put its efforts in recent years to move more towards a global museum and to set us up for a little bit of information about what's coming next, what we're working towards in the next handful of years. So I'm going to invite Nile to launch us into this.
Yeah, so I also am so grateful that everyone's here, and I hope that you've seen the exhibition before this talk, but if you haven't, please immediately, actually, you know what, leave the auditorium and go see it now. It's actually way more engaging than I will be, at least. So I am grateful that you're here, and I'm excited to speak with Jess about the way we think about the art that we bring to our audiences of the city of Rochester, Monroe County, Western New York, and nationally in many ways. The idea of the title of this program is global and contemporary, and that is something that we were very excited about being able to really talk about, and that will really shape our conversation. Thinking about MAG as a globally engaged museum. And I just wanted to offer a little context to what that means. It's not something that I think a lot of people are thinking about, but and the definition of a globally engaged museum is being debated now by sort of scholars and museum professionals and museum visitors. What exactly does that mean? Without going too deep into the context, museums like MAG that have cultures from across the globe and from eons and eons of time typically have been called in the past encyclopedic museums. You've probably heard that before. Metropolitan Museum of Art and others are encyclopedic museums, and that term is recently it's been revealed that it's pretty problematic for a lot of reasons. The reason I have the most issue with it is that it presumes that museums are these temples of knowledge, right? And we are the holders of knowledge. We get to decide what's important to learn about and what's not, and it gives the museum the authoritative voice above all others, which is not the case. And so, as museums move beyond the idea of being encyclopedic, the word global came to mind because we are showing global art. But I think for me, it's not just a matter of showing art from different parts of the world than where you're situated. It's also very much about thinking about global topics and engaging global contemporary artists, I think. So it's not just that we have something from France and something from Italy and something from China. It's about the fact that we are currently engaging contemporary artists who are from across the globe, which I think is the most important part about that idea of being a globally engaged museum. And also, I think, a duty for a museum like MAG, that's a regional museum with a largely regional audience, to highlight to bring the global artists to MAG, which we've done with the Ubuhle Women, but also to artists that we support from this region, to give them a global sort of presence in lots of ways, which I think is really important. So I think, Jess, you talk a little bit about the way in which MAG specifically is
right.
thinking
So,
about itself.
I mean, the primary conversation that'll happen today, I think, is around exhibitions. But of course, a museum has really two arms in that way. There's our collection, our permanent collection, which is, the legacy that MAG has built over more than 100 years, and then there's the exhibition arm. So those are the two tools that we're really talking about. And so thinking about collections, I know that my colleagues and my predecessors for the last 20, 30 years have been working hard to kind of correct some of the omissions that exist in our collections in terms of making sure that we're representing all of the collections and I mean all of the cultures of the world, and having kind of a representative collection of the world, but also interpreting it equally on equal levels. And that's something that is more challenging to do, and absolutely something that we're really launching into as a major project. And I'll talk a little bit more about it at the conclusion of this talk. But so in going a little bit, taking a step back in time, and thinking about the display of our collections of indigenous collections of African, Oceania, and the Americas. These are exhibition slides from our permanent collection galleries in the 70s. And this was, thinking about a MAG as an encyclopedic collection. The Memorial Art Gallery was established to serve both the University of Rochester and the community of Rochester. And so the goal was to build a teaching collection. This is what it was called at the time, this idea that you could kind of teach the history of art with a collection of art. And the curators and the educators at MAG over the course of the first 100 years easily were really working hard to achieve that. We're working hard to create this teaching collection. And so the first priority was to really build a strong collection of American art and European art. And a lot of these things kind of reflect the Western art historical model that many of us are familiar with, where sort of the European tradition of easel paintings and beautiful marble sculptures are kind of up the highest tier. And by the time the museum got into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the curators at that time were working to build the collection to reflect sort of the world as they were able to at the time. And so this is when the African art was acquired, the majority of it. This is when the oceanic art and some of the Native American art was collected and was displayed in our galleries at the time. So these photos I found in our archives, and I think they give a pretty great sense of how the work was displayed at that time. There's very little interpretation. There was just a tiny little piece of information next to the work that would identify the culture and probably where they thought it came from. And African and Oceanic art side by side, really not distinguished from each other. I do believe at some point I remember seeing one of the slides that was called the Gallery of Primitive Art at the time, which was a pretty standard use of terminology. And this concept, this framing of these works and these cultures as primitive is something that is still very much steeped in the way that our galleries look right now, right? So this is what we're working to repair and to correct.
To rewrite the narrative in so many ways, in the ways thinking about that, the hierarchy, the Eurocentrism of focusing on Western European and American traditional painting and sculpture and that kind of thing, really does impact and reflect what we're doing in so many ways, and the narratives that our visitors are learning without us really even trying to teach them, but they're being reinforced certainly in the very fabric of this building. So in so many ways, our efforts in the last several years have worked to help to rewrite that narrative.
Yes, and so there have been efforts made. These images on the left part of the screen, the top and the bottom, these are photos of what was the Arts of Africa and Oceania and the Americas in 2008. And this space had been reinstalled in the 80s. And so this was a sort of a bigger, fancier installation than the one from the 70s. But it was still quite dark. The ceiling was painted black. And there was, by the time I came around, if there had been interpretive text, When it was originally installed, it was no longer in place. It was really, everything just had the kind of the minimum amount of information. And so in 2009, we renovated the space, so all the images on the right-hand side are after 2009. We did the best we could to provide more context. We contacted scholars of African art, Native American scholars. We, really made an extra effort to add more context to the work. One of the things that we did as well was to bring in some contemporary art. So on the left, you can see a Preston Singletary glass piece that was introduced to have conversation with other works nearby. And on the right, you can see some contemporary Southwest ceramics that were on loan to us. Now, these contemporary pieces that had been put in this space, over time, some of them were on loan, and actually most of them were on loan, and those loans were slowly recalled over time. And so now all of those contemporary splashes of life and that kind of vibrancy has slowly been removed from that space. And we are working towards, I'll touch on it a little bit afterwards, but really we have to get back to prioritizing this collection, these collections in this space in terms of our kind of next steps. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So thinking about, as we're launching into this conversation around exhibitions, right? What can we do for collections? I'll touch on that a little bit. But what has MAG done in exhibitions? So if we've inherited a collection that is less than ideal, right? A collection that's kind of steeped in histories of colonialism and Eurocentrism, et cetera, how has MAG worked over the last 10 years to try to rectify this? And my predecessor, certainly, I was not involved in bringing these exhibitions, but this is work that's been going on for some time. And so in 2012, Changing Hands, Art Without Reservations was an exhibition that had been organized by the Museum of Art and Design. And this was a show of 140 works of contemporary art by Native and First Nations artists, and it represented a broad swath of the region, US Northeast, Southeast, and the Midwest. And this was a great example of the opportunity to bring in work by contemporary artists, and not only that, but contemporary artists who were interpreting and often redefining these traditional art forms like ceramics and beadwork and textiles and woodworking, hand in hand with more contemporary media like video and installation and photography. So this was, and you could see a wonderful Jeffrey Gibson punching bag hanging from the middle of the space, and this is a really exciting contemporary artist who incorporates beadwork and transforms these traditions into this very kind of vibrant and edgy contemporary visual language. So, the goal being with some of these decisions around exhibitions being, okay, so what does Rochester have to offer? We are in Western New York, and we are sort of, which is a hotbed for craft history, from the Roycroft community, arts and crafts, to Stickley, to Alfred and the ceramic program there. So Wendell Castle, Albert Paley, I mean, we really are just immersed in craft. And so when we're thinking about how we're going to do a better job in these interpretive opportunities, we're looking not just to flatten the hierarchy between, Western art and non-Western art, we're also looking to flatten the hierarchy between fine art, painting, sculpture, and, beadwork or ceramics, et cetera, glass blowing. These things all, it's all part of that same rewriting where we're looking to flatten out those hierarchies. So a show like Changing Hands really helps us achieve both of those things, to really touch our Rochester audiences who are so invested in craft and craft history, but also to work towards that flattening of hierarchies across the board. And another exciting exhibition that we had in 2016 that sort of helped to even further that interest is the Afghan War Rugs exhibition. And I love the title of this, The Modern Art of Central Asia. So this was an exhibition, I don't know if any of you had a chance to see it, but it was really, I think, something special and unique. Many of these rugs were woven by women. And actually, after after reading that recently, I thought, gosh, I don't really remember noticing that when I saw the exhibition, that was really something that was highlighted or foregrounded in the narrative. But there's the same attempt or effort and interest in taking a traditional art form and traditional forms and motifs and kind of subverting that tradition in some really interesting ways to speak to modern life. So the war rugs were, where these much more traditional patterns were replaced with iconography and imagery from modern life in Afghanistan. And so things like maps and weapons and army tanks, all of these things that started to appear in the rug starting around the 1970s and up through and including the post-September 11th intervention by the United States in Afghanistan. So once again, like a really great, this was not an exhibition that MAG organized. This is something that we were able to bring from outside of Rochester in order to help further our activities and efforts around telling a fuller, richer story that's going to help us become that sort of global museum we want to be and flatten those hierarchies a little bit more.
Yeah, we're going to move to the next slide. I think that allows us to think about even a more recent attempt at positioning ourselves as a global museum, and also really as we think, certainly since I've arrived in 2020, so right after the show, I didn't actually see Lessons of the Hour, but it's coming back, which I'm very excited about. We've been making massive efforts to become not just a globally engaged museum, but a community engaged museum in lots of ways. And I think those are not mutually exclusive. I think they're, in many ways, the global is local. And an excellent example of that is this exhibition, Lessons of the Hour, Frederick Douglass, by one of the most important international artists working right now, Isaac Julian, who recently received a knighthood. He's a Black British artist and was knighted by the Queen of England not too long ago for his efforts in the arts. Anyways, so the idea that this internationally renowned artist was invited by MAG to come here to learn about Frederick Douglass, certainly MAG's most famous and influential and significant historical figure, and one of the most of all of those things in American history. So this international artist would come to MAG to gather materials and to have inspiration for telling a Rochester story, which again, I think allows us to become a global museum and allows us to flatten some of those hierarchies so that it does not need to be a story or a theme about something that happened, thousands of miles away, something that happened right here in this space. But there's an artist who is thinking very broadly and is recognized globally, who's telling the story. And a 10-screen video installation that was commissioned by MAG and is co-owned by this museum and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and is now being acquired by museums across the globe, which is really exciting. And as I said, it will return to Rochester in a couple of years' time. This is, I think, a fine example of the way in which we are tackling this question, this idea of the global as local and vice versa, in a really interesting way. And if we move forward, should be very familiar to everybody that just came here today, because this is currently up in the Foreman Gallery. Kota Izawa, who, being a Japanese, German, American artist, is the literal embodiment of an international global artist, right? He's three national identities at least, and being of mixed race and heritage. His profile as an international artist is incredible, but he is thinking about, in the exhibition in the Foreman Gallery, right, when you walk into the galleries at MAG, thinking about a uniquely American event in recent history and current events, the 2016, and what continues on to this day, the taking of a knee. It started with NFL players, but now it's almost every national sport, in protest of the murder of Black people and people of color by the police. And so Izawa has a very thoughtful treatment of this and very dynamic with the video and the light boxes and watercolors. And so this is, again, a major international artist telling not a local story necessarily, although the Buffalo Bills are featured in one of the watercolors, but really thinking about something that is uniquely American and giving our audiences the opportunity to think about America's place in the world and how this artist who is represents so many different interests and sort of cultures and points of view is ruminating on this uniquely American event, at least at the moment when it began in 2016. And also, I should say that we placed that, intentionally placed this exhibition in that first gallery, so that no matter what you're coming to see, why you're coming to Mag Beyond those glass doors, you are going to be able to see this artwork, because I do think that being an engaged museum, whether it's globally or community or wherever else, you are a space for conversation, a space for debate, a space for thinking about controversial or hotly debated topics, like the idea of people protesting during the playing of the national anthem. So that's something that we continue to be very excited about, and it will continue. It's up now and will continue to be up for a little while. Well, no, maybe just one more month, right? Or is that?
I think it's staying through February.
It is, yeah,
it's
that's right. It's staying till February, so quite a while. So, which will allow, again, that many more people to really think about it. And as you do the former gallery and you go to the right, you'll be able to see this work of art by a local artist, Sean Dunwoody, who's a name that I'm sure everyone in the crowd recognizes. And the idea that we have this 4-panel painting called Unfinished Business in a place of great prominence in the Camaros Gallery, which is a gallery of 19th century American art, is not only doing the work of having an intervention that Jess mentioned earlier, having contemporary art speak to historical works of art and speak to historical themes and topics. In the foreground, you see a maquette, a contemporary work, a maquette by Alison Starr of Harriet Tubman. But in other artworks around this painting, there are 19th century works really focusing on the Civil War. And we often think about the idea of the past being present and the ideas of some of the reasons why the Civil War came to be, in ways in which we remember the vestiges of the Civil War and live the vestiges of the Civil War are in Dunwoody's painting. But also the physical relationship between the Ozawa and the Dunwoody, I think, helps us understand, again, this idea of the global being local. We have put, in so many ways, in conversation, these two artists and the way they're thinking about the world and the way they're representing the world in various ways. And certainly, if you've looked at the Dunwoody, you can hear the video, which is a string quartet playing the national anthem of Ozawa's work. And actually, I think for me, as I've given tours of this, I've talked about this work with many different people, having the national anthem, fairly, I wouldn't say loud, but audible, clearly, as you're talking about the protests of the 1960s and the protests of 2020 and what's going on in America, the state, and the way the racial reckoning we're working through is a really powerful moment. And I think does, when you take a bird's eye view, help to really think about this idea of the global and the local in so many ways, not just, again, through only engaging global contemporary artists, but putting local, regional artists in conversation with artists from all over the place, really. Which I think is a great segue to the reason why you're all here, Ubuhle Women. We are so excited about this show because it does so much of what we are interested in terms of engaging artists from another part of the world that many Rochesterians aren't able to go to regularly or at all, perhaps, and displaying, I think, for our audiences the incredible artistic practice of these women, but also really thinking about their identities as marginalized and disenfranchised, minoritized people in their own country who are part of this larger effort to really achieve freedom in so many ways and independence in other ways, but who have worked together and with the help of Bev Gibson to achieve financial independence and sustainability, which is very exciting. I mean, they've taken a traditional I'll say art form. I was going to say craft, but I will say art form of beading, and created that into impactful, beautiful, significant contemporary art, which is one of the main reasons why we were so excited about the show, and one of the things that kept us excited about the show. You may not realize, but museums choose exhibitions years before they go on the walls, and so sometimes it can happen that you are excited about it in year one, and then year four, when it actually goes on the walls, you're actually kind of over it. That was not the case with Ubuhle Women. This is certainly something that is incredibly dynamic and very exciting, and does do the work of giving Rochester's audience, as well as audience to Western New York, a glimpse into the experiences and the incredible artistic talent of people, and women in particular, women who have worked very hard to create an entrepreneurial experience for themselves, to support themselves and their families and their community, to our audiences. So you're excited about it in that way. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The artists. These photographs appear in the exhibition, which is something that I think is really important. Jess mentioned for the Afghan war rugs exhibition, she didn't realize that most of the rugs were made by women. And so if you didn't realize that, I'm assuming most of our audience visitors didn't realize it either. But so as we mounted the show, which is, of course, it has existed since 2013 and has been in many, many important museums in the United States, and we're very lucky to have it. As we were making it fit in our space and making it as appealing as possible for our audiences, we were really interested in highlighting the experience of the women who have created these works of art and are still creating amazing contemporary works of art. Their names are not on this slide. You will see their names and their stories in the exhibition, and Jess has some slides that will give a little bit more about their names and that kind of thing. But we wanted to show the images of these women because we're really foregrounding their experience in the strongest way possible, because I think their experiences and their dignity and their humility is staggering. We had an opportunity to speak with Bev and 3 of the women in the artist collective over Zoom not too long ago, and we were excited about asking them tons of questions, and we asked them a million questions. And one of the questions I asked was, what does it feel like to be a contemporary artist? Like, how do you feel being a really major contemporary artist with a show, that's traveling all over the United States and selling art all over the world? And each of them gave an answer that really did not focus on that. Didn't say, oh, my ego's great, I have this massive house and 10 cars and I'm famous. It was more about it was all about the way in which they are so proud that they have been able to take, again, a traditional practice that was handed down from their great-grandmothers to their grandmothers to their mothers themselves, and they've learned from Induna, who is Bev's co-founder, take this tradition and create contemporary art that is having such an impact across the globe, and especially the United States. And one of them said, and as we started focusing on that, and I switched gears from like, what's it like to be famous, to more like, what's it like to really make this kind of impact? And one of the artists said, she was so proud of the way in which her art has been received, but also what it does for her and her family. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, but I will never be poor as long as I have 2 hands. Right? So this idea that as long as she can do this beadwork, and we can broaden that out to anybody being able to do something, for themselves. As long as I can do this beadwork, I'll never be without what I need, or without what my children and my family need, which I think was so important and very enlightening for me as I was, a museum person thinking about, what's next magazine cover going to be on? I'm like, what are you talking about? We're actually doing this work for important reasons, not for glory and fame. So I was very impressed by that. I think their stories they shared with us are, and they said this in that chat also, their stories are very clearly relevant and apparent in the artworks and the logos that are on the wall, which is exciting.
Yeah, and I think thinking about what, when we ask those questions, like how does MAG choose shows? What are the things that you're looking for when you're making decisions around exhibitions? I would say that the quality of the art has to be great. The show has it. the story ideally is equally as great. This show has it. And so it's got the full package for an audience. And it's got these universal themes that I think, beauty and that human need for beauty and for seeing something, that transforms the everyday. But in addition, I think this exhibition connects with our goal in that it works to do that flattening of hierarchies, right? By taking this traditional form of beading and transforming it into a contemporary art form, which I think that's the thing, I don't feel like I can drive it home enough, how exciting it is that these women have created an entirely new contemporary art form. And that's really monumental, and it's really thrilling as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I feel like that was one of the things that for us got us most excited about this exhibition, and I think, as you suggested earlier, was part of every choice that we made as we were showing this, the color of the walls, the kind of font, the way the work is arranged, how we're programming around it. Everything was tied to foregrounding the women as artists and foregrounding the work as contemporary art. And so for us, it was an easy way in which this show kind of clicked in and made sense for us, thinking about MAG's goals to be a global museum and to flatten those hierarchies, as well as really tapping into, and this is something that was important, has been important to me for a long time, and ties back to an exhibition, the last exhibition that I organized was the Judith Schechter exhibition, and it was on stained glass. And one of the things that I love so much about her work, a contemporary stained glass artist, was that she was completely committed to embracing the decorative, the beautiful pattern and color, and these typically kind of denigrated art forms considered lower, like stained glass, like beading and ceramics, and insisting on its importance and insisting on its elevation. And so the work that we can do at MAG to support artists who are that innovative and that exciting and that much rule breakers in a way, I think is absolutely going to further our goals in terms of thinking about a globally engaged museum and not necessarily always valuing the traditional Western easel paintings, or of course that's all important work that we're not throwing overboard. That's not going anywhere. But how do we kind of mix these things together in order to create a more engaging and universal sort of story?
I'll also add, in terms of the flattening and what MAG is doing, we're showing this work, but we're also entering global conversations around this work. The idea of thinking about craft versus fine art is being debated by art historians and museum professionals and museum educators across the world, and it has been for quite some time. There have been some very important shows about craft, particularly in America. One was organized by Glenn Adamson, who wrote the foreword for Jess's catalog on Judith Schechter. So this idea of thinking about craft and what that means, and why is there a distinction between craft and fine art, and is that distinction real or not, is a hotly debated topic. And I think that's something that we are, that MAG in Rochester, New York, is contributing to and being a part of in terms of international conversations and a dialogue that is really important. And that's something that's important to me as a scholar and a professor of curatorial practice at the U of R. And I wanted to mention that because I think it's really an important piece of what we're doing here.
Yep. Of course, I was intended to scroll through these images as I talked, and I just get kind of caught up. But I wanted to make sure some of these images of the artists with their work was shown. So I think we're getting close to moving on to our next subject, which is really kind of talking about our next steps, right? So we've talked a little bit about where we're coming from, where we're at right now, and we're going to give a little bit of context for where we'd like to be heading in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm really excited about this. I mean, this is a journey, and we're never. I don't think we're ever going to reach a sort of destination, but we'll always just get better and better, melior, right? For you or our friends in the audience, but I think that coming down the pike, something I'm very excited about is an exhibition about Yayoi Kusama, who I think is probably the most international, the epitome of the global artist, right? And certainly having a moment after a very long career from the early 1960s till now, to this very day, is again the epitome of a global artist, and we'll be showing having some of her installations and some of her artwork, and of course, just this way, Obliterated Venus by Kusama has been on view in the Hawks Gallery for quite some time. So we're very excited about that and what that's going to again do for our audiences by having the artwork of this artist, it's a Japanese artist who has made a huge impact in the history of modern art and contemporary art for a very long time. So that's one way, a very small, not as a huge way, it's not a very small way, but one way amongst many that we are, again, continuing to move in a global direction.
And I think thinking back to that other side of the other tool being collections and what our next steps will be around that, we're really focusing very seriously on how we can interpret better those indigenous collections of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. And that is our next big project. We are really looking to some of the most exciting ways that I've seen museums deal with some of these structural inequities that have persisted over time is with transparency, right? Just talking about that, Ducci said, the institutional authoritative voice, right? To kind of try to start taking a step back from that and saying, we don't have all the answers, where we are a part of a museum. Western museums, by their very natures, are somewhat problematic institutions in that they're really sort of steeped in those histories of oppression, colonialism, and that's the truth of what we are. So how do we contend with that? How do we talk about it? How do we have exciting, challenging conversations about these topics and foreground this? So it's really about excavating and exposing these histories and the ways in which they take shape in our galleries and in our collections, and inviting a dialogue, inviting a conversation about it. So in our AOA gallery, we have recently put up this large red sort of alert. We hope that color somewhat says, look at us, this is an issue. Signage that says we're rethinking, we don't have the answers yet. This is going to be a long process, but we recognize that the way in which these collections have been brought into the museum, the way that they are interpreted, the way that they are housed in this space, all of these things are vestiges of our past, and we want to do better. So what I think we want to do with these moments for transparency is basically take our audience's hand and say, come along with us. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it together. So this is there's going to be more ways in which, in addition to being more transparent, and in addition to really dedicating institutional resources, everything from money, more staff to help support these projects. There's other ways that we can start to advance these things. Some of the opportunities where we're engaging contemporary art to speak to the historical collections is how we're doing this as well. So we've got in our Camaros Gallery of 19th Century American Art, we have the Shundunwoody, but we also have a contemporary piece by an indigenous artist named Chinupa Hansgaluger, that large ceramic arm in the middle of the room. And it's the kind of thing, and it's intended to be, you can't miss it. When you walk in the space, you're going to see it. And it's intended to be confrontational and to really engage with the art around it. So I encourage you to go take a look at that. There's going to be different opportunities, and we're going to get it wrong sometimes, and sometimes we're going to get it right. And I think the goal is for us to continue to ask those questions, and our next steps, in particular in the AOA galleries, is not to figure out a way to do a better job installing that art back in that space. It's beyond that, right? We don't want to do a permanent installation somewhere and say, oh, we figured it out. We know the better way to install this art. We want to keep asking those questions. So we're thinking about doing these kind of smaller, potentially lab exhibitions, where we create a lab space where we're inviting outside experts to come in and help us ask questions about these collections. And so they'll be cycling through, it'll be very dynamic, very engaged, and it'll not be about answering questions. It'll be about asking questions.
But I think the thing is, I was just thinking about, I hope I've coined this phrase, I probably haven't, but the idea that museums should be a place for questions, not answers, right? Thinking about museum as temple or forum, a very famous museum studies article. The idea that, you become for the authoritative voice about, oh, this is what this artwork means and this is what this means. We're moving so far away from that and really thinking about, it's not a place where you receive answers, it's a place where you ask questions and discover from within yourself, certainly, what your own response may be, which may be very different from your friend, your family member, your colleague, whomever. And in May, we had Damon Reeves, who is the head of education at the National Gallery of Art, come and speak to our docents. And he talked a lot about shared authority as a way, as an approach for museum education and engagement into the future. And that's something that stuck with me a lot. And he and I have had subsequent conversations about it. And this is a great example. This began before he spoke, obviously, but the idea of shared authority in this, you might be able to see it, but we solicit people to email, especially create an email address with ideas, with thoughts, with other problems that we haven't even seen in this space, and with possible potential strategies for moving forward. So it's exciting, and it's part and parcel to, again, the reason that Jess and I are presenting about this together, because in the way in which educators and curators work together to present installations and artworks and exhibitions to our audiences, this complex and problematic gallery space is also being having the equal attention of the two of us in our departments, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and we're bringing in, I mean, we've had a couple of sessions this summer where we're bringing in U of R and other faculty in the region to talk through some of these ideas and challenges. And our next step, hopefully in the fall and winter, is to bring together an advisory group. And this is really bringing in folks from outside of the museum, both in our communities and experts that may be from across the country, across the globe potentially, people that we are asking them to help us figure this out. And that's important in that shared authority piece. I think that museums really need to be doing that. So I think we could probably take some questions.
Yeah, I think so.
I hope I see some familiar faces, some new faces.
Oh, there's plenty of hands.
Right.
Great. We have mic runners.
We've got mic runners.
So there's the incredible Chio Uyama on one side, and then a very helpful volunteer on the other.
Hi, fantastic talk. I was curious, Jess, you mentioned in connection with the Schechter show that stained glass was treated as a craft art and sort of seen as lower than a fine art. My impression, probably just due to kind of its prominence in European churches and cathedrals, was that stained glass was treated as fine art. So I was wondering if I could hear sort of both your thoughts on that kind of distinction and sort of where the lines get blurred. I'm probably speaking from ignorance here, but that was just sort of my impression of it.
I mean, I think that's a really good question. The question about stained glass and where it kind of falls, that to me even was surprising, because once I really got into understanding the world of glass, then I understood the hierarchies within the world of glass. So hot glass or blown glass is like the big, sexy, important thing that everybody's looking at and talking about. And then stained glass is down below, even within the glass world. So I think that was something that was interesting for me to know, because Judith Schechter has dealt with that kind of, people sort of poo-pooing or like diminishing the value of stained glass because it's not as sexy as, the Dale Chihuly blowing, that stuff that gets a lot more attention. So even within each craft form or art form or media, there are their own hierarchies that exist.
Well, also, it goes back to the form and function thing. Stained glass is functional, right? I mean, it's beautiful, but it also keeps the weather out and filters sunlight. Versus, Chihuly's fine. So versus a Chihuly piece that's meant just to be beautiful and just sit there and you look at it and you engage with it. But stained glass, and also I can name Chihuly and other glass artists. I can't name one person besides Judith Schechter who is making. If I wanted stained glass windows in my home today, I likely wouldn't find some like super incredible, amazing international artist that can afford that person. But also I wouldn't probably, they don't regularly come to mind. Versus if I wanted a really exquisite piece of glass, I would go to a gallery that carries Chihuly or others and and purchased it. So again, it's that idea of something being functional, like stained glass, and even in the height of stained glass in cathedrals and other places in Western Europe, all over Europe, the people that were doing that weren't considered to be masters in the way that someone painting a fresco would have been. So I think that's
Good point. Thank you.
Oh, so many hands.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really been, it's been great. And I'm very excited about what you're talking about for the future. I moved here in 1970 after having spent 2.5 years in Africa. And I have to tell you, I was, I don't know what the right word is, astonished to find that the African, Oceanic, and Central American art or work was housed together with very little distinction. And I thought that, and well, that was the past.
And it's actually really indicative of what many Western
I
museums
realize
in
that.
American, it's
I
very
realize that. I'm an
traditional.
anthropologist, and I know a lot about
Yeah.
the history.
Right.
And, you know, even if museum studies have changed. So I am curious, though, to know about the space that has been used. And, I mean, just that in its being on the side, it was so easy for people to come to MAG and never even see that part. It was the literal marginalization of that work, which has, and you know.
I think that's a great
So
point.
what are you talking about? I'm sure you haven't decided.
Yes.
About where
What
this
to do.
material is going to be housed.
It won't be there.
And shown. It won't be
Luckily.
there.
No, it will not.
Okay,
It will not
I can
be,
go home and finally have a glass of champagne and toast MAG.
it will not be in that space, a little space off the side that is unmarked. Another long-term installation is going in that space. So these collections will be, just mentioned our idea about a lab space where people from the community, from U of R and other schools and colleges and universities in the area get to work with these collections and use them to explore themes and ideas as one opportunity or one suggestion. When we engage the advisory group, they will advise us as the best thing to do. But it's not just a matter of, again, painting the walls and adding more text or doing a better job separating them. It's really about blowing up this paradigm that these Black and brown people are othered in this small, dark space that people hardly ever see. So
Yeah, and I think one thing I would want to say and just make a really clear point that this is a Western museological tradition, right? At the Met, they're currently in the process of renovating and reinstalling, but museums across the country have shown their collections like this. So it's not that MAG is particularly problematic in any way. I mean, this is really pretty standard, and I know that my predecessors and the people who came before me have all done their best. I think we always want to be very conscious of not making it seem like, oh, well, they were screwing up and doing it wrong and we're going to do it right. That's not at all the case. I think that thinking changes and understanding of what a museum's responsibility is and engagement with their community. I mean, that's something that's constantly in flux.
and also priorities and resources and expertise. We don't have a curator of indigenous art or African art or art of Oceania. So, that's part of it as well. But not as an excuse, certainly, but part of the reason why it is what it is. But there have been efforts. The 2009 effort was a great effort and made a huge improvement.
There's been plenty of efforts over time, and I think it's just about sort of getting a laser focus on this as a priority is what the institution has to do.
Mm-hmm.
One other tiny detail, you might have been about to mention it a minute ago, but the space, what we now call the AOA Gallery, it's we think that in a few years, the Isaac Julian will go in that space. So that is really kind of in some ways forcing the issue because we want to clear that out so that we could show this incredibly dynamic, contemporary, important, international, global Rochester story that's very alive and vibrant, activate that space in a new way. And so then we need to figure out what to do with those collections, how to do a better job with interpretation. So that's kind of helping catalyze that project in a big way.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciated the glimpses into the past for past exhibitions, but when I think about that with the current one, is the Ubuhle Women, is this the first time the MAG is engaged with contemporary African artists?
That's a great question.
No, actually, within the last few years, we had an exhibition of Meliko Magosi's sort of epic series of paintings called Pax Kafraria, which is his work is incredibly realist, representational, large-scale, mural-size almost easel paintings, and it was the artist kind of very enigmatic and evocative, sort of. It was kind of like a made-up history of a South African country. Southern African country. And so that was back in 2000, let's see, was it like 16 or 17? And that was, very much more traditional, like contemporary artist as you would imagine. He's an artist who is represented by galleries around the world, really. And that was back in 2017. So quite different than Ubuhle Women, but also another contemporary African artist. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah. Oh.
Hi, thanks both. So Jess, you mentioned that there's this process that goes into selecting the big exhibits that come through like years in advance. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the thinking, the sort of weighing of options that the museum puts in, and how you choose 4 years sort of in the past of what we'll actually be seeing 4 years in the future.
Yeah, I think she's asking about the process that MAG goes through and how we make decisions, and I think that's a great question. We are looking, as I mentioned briefly, we're looking at the art, we're looking at the quality of the art, we're looking at the narratives it can tell, we're looking at the ways in which it can connect with our audiences, and also the way in which it's going to further our mission.
Right.
Our mission and our current priorities, and the way it's going to kind of round out our offerings, right? So the museum is not only what's in the docent gallery, the big exhibition space, but also what we're showing in our media arts gallery, and also what we have in our Hurlbut gallery, which features contemporary mural art, and what's happening in the camera space. So we have to tell a full story, right? We're looking for something that's cohesive, something that's dynamic, something that speaks to multiple audiences, generational audiences, and kind of has a little bit for everyone.
And something that helps people discover something new about the art, the artists themselves, the world. That's always something I think about, the idea of discovery, which is part of our vision. But the idea that that's a big part of it too. They're not just going to see and go, yeah, this is a standalone story. It's something new and sort of exciting.
Yeah. So what will often happen is a curator will either have an idea for an exhibition or will hear about an exhibition from outside of MAG and consider it. Is this of interest for us? And so all of those questions get asked. And if you clear all of those hurdles and you decide it is of interest, then it goes to our visioning group. And our visioning group is our curatorial team and our exhibitions and academic program members from all of those departments and our director. We meet monthly and we present these opportunities and we start hashing out whether or not this is something that could be of interest. And you could present something to the visioning committee 3 or 4 times over a couple of years before it might land with some stickiness. And I always say that to people on my team, in the curatorial team. I say, they'll say, can we do it? Is this a go? Can we do this project? And I'll say, all right. It'll come up again, bring it up again. This is not the right moment, but it's the right thing for MAG, and so we can keep thinking about it. So it can be a very many months and years long process for an exhibition to actually really click in with what makes sense. So if it does clear the visioning group, then it needs to go to our senior staff team where all of the departments are represented. So our facilities head can tell us, well, that's too much construction, we can't do that because we've got this other project happening at the same time. Or marketing can tell us, we think that we could do these really exciting things and we'll be able to connect with audiences, or the social media launch, or an advancement will let us know, can we sell this show to donors? Do we have people in Rochester that we're connected with that we think would get excited about this show? So all of those pieces have to come together, and it needs to make sense with our very complicated exhibition schedule, which has multiple galleries at one time.
And which shift frequently for all kinds of reasons.
No.
I mean, the galleries don't, the shows.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's just like, just sort of like, just, yeah.
So then, if it's cleared with senior staff, then it becomes a reality. And usually, by the time that happens, we're at least 2 years, ideally, from when the show will open. So it is kind of a moving target in a lot of ways when you think about like making decisions about shows, and then the actual exhibition happens, 4 or 5 years later. Did I see it?
I think it may be 2008, 2009. You did an exhibit on African American artists, some of whom went to Europe in the 18th and 19th century, and an American itinerant artist who did portraiture work, and they were all brought together in one exhibit here. And I wondered if anybody remembered what an outstanding exhibit that was.
I'm drawing a blank on that. Chio,
And
does
you
that
should
ring a
go
bell for
back
you?
and look at that.
Walter O. Evans. Yeah, maybe it was Walter Evans. It was a collection. Yeah. Yeah, Chio can speak to it.
Well, I don't know. I just came in and there it was on the walls, and I was seeing things I had never seen before. I did not know that there were itinerant artists floating around, African American artists. They're not American. They came straight from Africa to Europe and painted.
Oh.
There were some who left America and went to Europe because people would pay them, hire them to paint their family in the same tradition that we do it here. It's that in that period in which we were making photographs by hand.
James, do you still have a question? James.
Is it on, Gio? Because have you thought about integrating the art that's in the AOA throughout the gallery, like we've been doing recently with contemporary art in the upstairs, 18th century gallery? It really sparks a conversation when it's next to traditional art.
Yeah, it does. I mean, we've thought that a little bit, and there are times that people do that. For instance, you see a lot of places like the Barnes Foundation,
Right.
for instance, Cubism next to African masks because of the
Right.
direct relationship. I think one thing, to my mind, that hinders us in that is our lack of curatorial and educational expertise in the arts of Africa, for
Okay.
instance. So we're able to do the interventions where we bring in contemporary art pieces with historical collections because we have a lot of expertise in contemporary art, all the way in various departments. But if we do something like that, it has to be really, I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be right. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that is one strategy that some museums are using to activate African collection, or collections of places that are non-Western, less familiar to American audiences maybe, and collections that are more familiar because they're Western European or American.
I think when that's done, it can be really exciting. It's got to be done right, because it could end up being that the non-Western collections are in service to the Western collections, right? So you have to find the right balance
Yeah.
there. I think some museums have done it successfully. I don't know that it would be the answer for us, like exclusively, but right now, I am open. I really feel like I'm not closing any doors in terms of thinking about how to tell these stories, how to deal with these collections. I am in a position where I'm just ready to learn and listen and kind of work our way to finding the best solution. So I'm not going to close any doors at this point at all.
Yeah, I didn't mean
Completely
to
open.
suggest it was a bad idea.
What's that?
I didn't mean to suggest it was a bad idea.
No, I
certainly
can understand.
Yeah.
Jane, yeah.
It's just,
So
the other question I had is, are we thinking about trying to collect for our permanent collection contemporary African artists, work by contemporary African artists? So then you can maybe even work a little bit more with just positioning, like we did with the Willie Cole. And so,
We're always thinking about acquiring. I mean, I think when you show work, when you exhibit work, the right thing to do for a museum, oftentimes, not always, but the best thing to do to really show a commitment to an artist is to acquire work. Because it's one thing to show the work, it's another thing to make a long-term commitment by acquisition. And so when we showed Meliko Magosi, we very seriously considered it an acquisition. It didn't work out in the end, and it was for a variety of reasons. But that is, I think, a part of the responsibility of a museum, because the permanent collection has such longevity and is permanent. And that's a different level of commitment. Yeah.
Mary had
I'd just like to lift up the ideas that you're using in promoting the redesign of these displays. I've heard Dr. Blunt talk about community engaged museums, and museums. For us to be community engaged, I believe our communities need to feel ownership. And to feel ownership, I think we need to have these communities co-create our exhibitions. And it sounds like that's just what you're doing by inviting not only experts, but people who actually are parts of these cultural traditions to be engaged in the conversation about how the exhibition should be designed. So I'm really look forward to that coming together.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mary.
we're not doing it yet, but we intend to, and I think you're exactly right. It's got to be, we need to be speaking both locally as well as, to the more traditional scholars that you go to. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea that many of you have heard me talk about all the time, going into the community, asking how members of the community would like to be engaged by this museum, is what we need to do, and then of course learning what the barriers to full participation are and breaking those down. It's not enough to have an incredible, beautiful exhibition like Ubuhle Women and then just expect people to show up. We really want to go and bring it to people and to invite people, quite frankly, quite literally. And many of the sponsors of this exhibition are sponsors that have not generally sponsored exhibitions at MAG before, which we're very excited about because they believed in the mission of this collective. They believed the mission of Bev and Induna. They believed in, and then they, without even seeing the art in real life, and then when they saw it this weekend, they were overjoyed and overwhelmed. So much so that one person actually touched, I watched her rub her hand across one of the artworks. No damage was done, but it was just sort of, it was just that was one moment. Please don't go in and now touch all the art. That's not what I'm suggesting. But she was so moved that she couldn't help herself to do it, and I just was like, "We'll talk later." But so it's the very exciting and really a wonderful way of thinking about going to the community and asking for support and asking for ideas and asking for and having people feel that anybody who you are, anybody in this community feel that this space is a part of their community, just like schools and places of worship and recreation centers and other places where people gather. I think that's important to all of us, that MAG and its incredible resources are seen that way. So I think we're quite
we're
over.
At 3:10.
Yeah. So
I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I wanted to thank Bev for coming and visiting us from South Africa, and also wanted to see, are you available for people if they have questions? We would love to go into the gallery space if you'd like to go spend some time looking at the art. Bev has tons of great stories about the art, so if you wanted to hear more about the artists and what they're up to now, I know that she can share that with you.
And also, do go to the gallery store. There are incredible works of art and some beautiful jewelry and other pieces created by the Ubuhle Women for sale there, if you want to sort of take a piece of it home with you.
And more recent work, right? So you could see what they're up to now, which is exciting. Yeah, still creating, still making art.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciated it.